Okay, well, welcome to the Psychohistory Forum for our ninth presidential election year meeting. And it's good we're able to do this. It's certainly different. You have the schedule of the meeting. Let me say a few things about what's going on as usual. We have a lot of material for Clio Psyche, and of course, if you're not a regular member, Dan, and you go to our Clio Psyche website, and you can find back issues from when we started in 1994 through 2019. So it's
I can't hear.
You can check out some prior issues. Most of our material in this issue will be on caregiving, some poetry of caregiving. We also have cinema. Anderson has worked hard in getting some good material, and so we have some very good material on Woody Allen, and a variety of other things, as always. The teaching articles have been postponed to our next meeting, our next issue in the spring, because we simply have too much material, and so we'll put that off. Encourage you, as in the announcement, to go to our Google Psychohistory group and share materials on it. Indeed, I see Brian, and of course Ken is here, very active in the IPA and making the IPA newsletter a very valuable source this year. It's enlarged it enormously, and I wonder even if some of those articles can be put up on our listserv to provoke discussion. In any event, it's open, so anyone can sign in right now. If we have any problems, then of course we'll close it again. Our usual meetings are conducted in a different way. I get up before dawn. I drive to Northwestern University or to the apartment of some psychoanalyst in New York, and we have the meetings there. And we sit around, and sometimes people even bring delicious Danish and other things. Today, I just had to walk downstairs, but at the normal meetings, everyone has read the paper ahead of time, I hope, and each person introduces herself or himself very briefly and asks the question of the presenter. Usually it's one presenter, which the presenter may later on answer, and we limit the presenter to 20 minutes. That's our usual way, and then we spend almost all our time on discussion and go have a nice lunch elsewhere, and Ken usually finds a restaurant in recent years for that lunch. We're doing things differently, partly because I didn't know how many people are going to show up, and partly because half of the Psychohistory Forum members have never been to a meeting. They're outside of the greater metropolitan area, and now we have the opportunity to have them here, which is wonderful, but of course it's different. We're talking at our monthly leadership meeting on Wednesday about that now we could have meetings with the Europeans involved. We could have meetings with the talented young scholar from India who I've been working with for a number of months now, or people from anywhere in the world. And that would be a very good thing. You know, so we're going to explore that, and we'll see what we'll come up with. We normally have had meetings every other month, but this is in recent years we've been down to somewhat fewer meetings, aside from those we sponsor at international conferences. So those are most of the issues. I should say the initial memo that I sent out said till 1:30. So Ina has said that she would keep it open until after we close the formal meeting, which will be mostly discussion by 1 o'clock, that if people want to exchange back and forth on the election or anything we've said, that and that wouldn't have to be on a chat function. Matter of fact, depends on how many people we have here. We may not have to use the chat function later on for the open discussion. Certainly in my classes of 25, I never bother with the chat function, okay. So it is very good to be here. Ina and Ken, why don't you go ahead and give the ground rules, and then I can talk about Joe Biden, though I am asking that you not bring up the name of the person he happens to be running against in the question, because I have been writing papers. I don't remember if it's 12 or 14 papers I've written on the election and the candidates starting in February 2016. And I have written so much on the current occupant of the White House. And I want to focus on Biden, who's a worthy politician, and probably better than most in his own right, rather than simply being the non-president momentarily, I hope. So, ground rules?
Okay. So my name is Ken Fuchsman. Most of you know me. I'm the designated moderator, also co-editor with Michael Maccabee of Psychoanalytic and Historical Perspectives in the Leadership of Donald Trump. This meeting, as Paul said, is more structured than the usual meetings are. And so what happens is each presenter speaks for 15 minutes, then there's 20 minutes of questions. When you have a question, send me something in the chat function, which you will find is sort of in the circle on the top of the screen, and then I will call on people in the order that they have asked a question. What we want to have happen is your question should be no longer than a minute, and the responder will have no more than 2 minutes, because we have just 20 minutes for this session, and we want to have as many questions as possible. So if you can do that, that would be great. Also, when the presenter is speaking, normally we turn off our mics, and normally we turn off our screen, but Paul, do you want people to keep the screen on so you can see who's present?
Absolutely, and
Okay.
I'm wondering who's behind home. I'm seeing a home. I'm also seeing a couple of people from the West Coast, as well as, of course, from Hawaii. So it'd be nice to see the face behind the identification, since I don't know if behind the screen marked home is someone I've known for 50 years or if it's someone I'm getting to meet today.
Hi,
So
Paul.
Ina,
This is Susan. When I finish eating breakfast, I'm going to turn on my screen.
okay.
Oh, good.
Ina, do you have anything more that should be added?
Yes. Okay. So, people who are here using the app or the web. In order to write, to put yourself in line for questions, you just use the little bubble. Like if you never used it, it's on the right upper corner near the setting. So it's a 3 dots, then setting to the left, and to the left is a little bubble. You open the bubble, and then you can type your name and that you have a question, and then Ken will know to call you in that sequence as you put yourself in line. Those who are calling in, because it was one caller and the caller went away somewhere, but then I think that, you know, somebody will come as a caller, they might not be able to type in anything. So if you're a caller, you can use my phone for texting the question, 646-522-1056. I will repeat it before each presentation so people know. Sometimes people come late. I think we need to get the ground rules before each presentation, because people come late and they don't hear and they don't see anything in the chat before they come in. So if I posted something 10 minutes ago and person comes in now, the person will not see any of the information. So my number 646-522-1056. If you have technical questions, or if you're a caller and you want to have, you know, to ask a question, just give me your name and then you will be given, you know, a time to ask a question. And the question is only 1 minute. Yes. Also, as Ken said, at the end, when Paul and, you know, everything is done with official meeting and some people see each other very rarely and want to stay on, I will have the GoToMeeting open for another half an hour from 1 to 1:30 without any recordings, for you just to say hello to each other in person. Okay, so that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm about to introduce Paul. Then he will have 15 minutes. Then we'll have 20 minutes of questions. Then we'll go to Dan McAdams, and after Dan, Dr. Denis O'Keefe. So Paul Elovitz, as you probably know, is the founder of the Psychohistory Forum and the founder and co-editor of Clio Psyche. He has been writing on presidential elections since 1976. He is also author of The Making of Psychohistory, which he's not holding up. And so he will be speaking today on Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee for president. So Paul, so all of us now will then mute our microphones and keep our picture on for Paul's sake. It's all yours, Paul.
Thank you, Ken and Ina. Psychobiographical and psychopolitical insights on Joseph Robinette Biden. Joe Biden has demonstrated he is a uniter rather than a divider. While his gaffes, misremembering, political puffery, and advanced age illustrates that he is far from my traditional ideal for the presidency, he's proven himself over a 47-year career. He is an empathetic individual, solid problem solver, who won the highly competitive nomination and should be an effective president. Joe Biden has character, and his policies are geared to the interest of the middle class and the poor. At home, he learned that politics was about honor, and that he was better than no man, and no man was better than him, helping prepare him to lead a democracy of equal citizens. Joe grew up in a warm home where there was conversation rather than physical punishment, which is related to earning the trust of colleagues in the Senate and elsewhere during his long years as a legislator. Mitch McConnell wrote that he likes Joe Biden, who listened while negotiating, which is not typical. Joe Biden was born November 20th, 1942, as the eldest of 4 children in a close-knit family. Joey is the leader of his siblings as well as his friends. one of whom remembers him as, quote, an aggressive guy who was a leader, who was a risk taker, a good guy, a friend with a sense of fairness, and one of those people who was just plain fun to be with, end quote. Another friend declared, quote, he stuck out in the crowd. He was kind of the go-to guy, end quote. Although small for his age, he was extremely athletic. He hung out with his friends in their rough neighborhood, roaming the city dump, playing pickup baseball and football on vacant lots. He was quite the daredevil, throwing water balloons or snowballs at the drivers of cars or trucks, and sometimes being chased by the recipient. At one point on a dare, when age 8 or 9, he ran under a moving dump truck and came out uninjured. His friends said he always gave 100% to all his efforts. His sister Val, a full-fledged tomboy, tagged along with him and was readily accepted by his friends. Val reports that, quote, he always told me that whatever he did, I can do better, end quote. She was his campaign manager in his 20s when he ran for county council and then the Senate. And for most of his subsequent campaigns, she was the manager, or at least very active. For Joey, it wasn't all just school and games and making mischief on the streets. Sunday was for church, later on with the men talking politics. Because of the economic necessity, the Bidens had to move in with Joey's in-laws in the modest home of the Truman, Joey's father's in-laws, who were Truman Democrats. They had enormous influence on the future vice president. His grandfather was a political junkie who talked about politics and argued, and from whom he imbibed certain strong values. Reluctantly, for the sake of a much-needed job, the Bidens had to move to Wilmington, Delaware, where their breadwinner initially cleaned boilers. Then he sold used cars, a job he disliked. And when his son became a senator, he found something else as more appropriate for the father of the senator. Joey would increase considerably in size during his childhood, was a very popular athlete and student who gradually overcame a stutter which had been bane of his existence. Most of his child and adolescent nicknames were derogatory and referenced Joey's stutter. Having been exempted from mandatory public speaking requirement, in his sophomore year, he gave the mandatory talk to the student body without stuttering. Talking became Joe Biden's strength, and he's known for his Irish gift of gab. He proudly declares that, quote, my dad always said, champ, the measure of a man is not how often he is knocked down, but how quickly he gets up, end quote. After lingering thoughts of becoming a priest, Joey set his sights on becoming a lawyer, and there was one reference at age 12 about being a president, as so many kids have such a thought, or at least used to in an earlier generation. I don't know about now. Parental styles of child rearing and discipline have a profound impact on the lives and political choices of their children. What counted in the Biden household was that children stand up for each other, be fair, and practice empathy. Joey writes that whenever we had a problem, we'd go straight to mom and she'd set us straight. When a nun disrespected Joe in class, by mocking his stutter, he simply walked out of the classroom 2 miles home His mother had heard from the school by then, and she said, "Get in the car," toddler in hand, went to the school and to the principal's office, demanded to see the teacher, and they asked the nun teacher, what did you say to my son? Well, I was making a point, and so I said, boo, 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 Biden. And his little 5'1" mom went face to face with that teacher and said, if you ever speak to my son like that again, I'll come back and rip the bonnet right off your head. Do you understand me? Joey, go back to class. And her sensitivity to her son's pain, defense of him, reflected a caring mother who also encouraged her children to stand up for the rights of others. The Biden values were quite clear. In promises to keep in 2007, the senator, vice president wrote, quote, "The one thing mother could not stand was meanness." Both parents shared the same values. And at the dinner table, Dad sometimes brought up issues like quote, morality, justice, equality, and the Holocaust, declaring that, quote, "We each had a personal responsibility to speak out when we saw that kind of wrong." And he not only said that, but he enacted that in his life. At a Christmas party of a car dealership, and he was the manager of it. The boss, who claimed to be the working man's friend, from on high threw down on the dance floor silver dollars to have the secretaries and mechanics and salesmen scrambling for them in disgust. The Bidens just walked out, and Joe Biden Sr. walked out of the job that because he quit on the spot with his wife's full approval. Biden, as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has stood up in the face of genocide, as in the Balkans and elsewhere. Joey, who was very proud of having been made a lieutenant in the safety patrol in grade school, one day faced a dilemma which he took to his dad. His beloved sister Val had acted up on the bus, and it was his responsibility to report him. His father listened and then said that Joey had a choice. The next day, Joey turned in that shiny blue badge he was so proud of. That decision was left to him was an important development in moral development. Later in life, Joe Biden sits down with people, as his father did with him, proceeds to act after hearing their side of the story. Modeling moral behaviors, crucially important to children. Biden benefited greatly, not only from the advice, but also from the modeling. He was very protective of his kid sister, who he always called my best friend. Now, the determination Joe Biden showed to overcome his stutter and played a crucial role in his life. He would memorize poetry. He would plan ahead. Okay, when is the teacher going to be calling on me? It was when he'd be nervous and uncomfortable in front of other people that he would stutter. So there was a lot of planning on the spot, which is very helpful for a politician. He writes, quote, "I wouldn't wish away the darkest days of the stutter. It ended up being a good thing for me, made me a better person," end quote. He overcame it, and even though there are remnants of it in subsequent life, stuttering remains a painful issue. But he watched and figured out things, and Despite that, even as a very young kid, he was the go-to guy, daredevil, the leader in athletics, who gained the respect of others, which is the basis of leadership. Now, love, loss, and politics in the life of Joe Biden. Joe Biden felt passionately in love with two very attractive women. The first he met in college. He married her soon afterwards and went to law school in Syracuse, there where she lived, despite her Protestant family concern that he was a Catholic. Together they raised a close family, had 3 kids. They decided to have their kids early because they wanted to have a long and happy life after raising the kids. But tragedy struck right before Christmas, shortly after Joe had been elected to the Senate at 29. Neela and their baby daughter were killed in a traffic accident. The 2 boys were badly injured, one in a full body cast. Biden was so devastated that he said, quote, "Suicide wasn't just an option for me. It was a rational choice because the pain was just so incredible." But when he looked at his sleeping sons, 4 and 3 years old, in hospital beds, he knew that, quote, "I had no choice but to fight to stay alive." He felt enormous rage at his loss, and his life collapsed into the needs of his 2 sons. He had no interest whatsoever in the Senate then, despite the leaders, especially the Democrats, calling him and doing everything to keep him from resigning. His sister Val moved in to his house when one of the boys came home from the hospital while he stayed in the hospital with the other son. Indeed, he would be finally become a senator in the cloakroom of the hospital near his son. His sister stayed for 3 years. He couldn't sleep. He was so torn. The only time he had some he had some respite from his agony, he was when he was on the road, when he agreed to campaign for somebody else. But that was fine. But his brother, Richie, wouldn't let him travel alone because the family feared if he came back to a strange hotel room that he might, he might do something terrible. Biden says, finally, quote, "Finally, I began to make peace with God or myself. I just got tired of wallowing in grief." Joe Biden's powerful attachment to his 3 and 4-year-old sons meant that he was there for them when they woke up in the morning and when they ate their dessert while he ate his dinner after taking the Amtrak train back from the Capitol. No matter who he was with, he always took their phone calls and he gave them a wild card. All they had to do was tell him in the morning, "Daddy, I want to come to Daddy's work," and they could come with him. Very unusual for a senator to put his family, before the time for socializing, and of course, being in Delaware made it possible. It cost 2 hours a day. Now, Joseph Biden III, known as Bo, followed him into politics, became the Attorney General of Delaware, and announced he was running for governor. The vice president declared, and I quote, "Bo was a rising star in Democratic politics, generally regarded as the most popular politician in the state, more popular even than his father. Bo Biden at age 45 was Joe Biden 2.0. He had all the best of me, but with all the bugs and flaws engineered out, I was pretty sure Bo would run for president one day, and with his brother's help, he would win, end quote. Biden went beyond being a loving father, reflecting in his declaring, quote, I am not sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I began to look up to my own sons, end quote. Joe's own failed attempts in 1988 and 2008 to become president, meant that his attention turned to his sons. Well, 2 years after the tragic loss of his wife and daughter, at age 32, he was ready to date again, and his brother fixed him up with a 24-year-old college student who was separated and getting a divorce. He was smitten with Jill Jacobs, who was enjoying living on her own and was slow to commit beyond dating. When ultimately, given the choice of marrying or breaking off the relationship, she eventually accepted Biden's fifth marriage proposal. The boys were very eager to have Dad marry Jill, and indeed, they were an important part of the marriage ceremony. Later, a girl was born to them. And Where the Light Enters, Building a Family, Discovering Myself in 2019, Jill Biden writes about a very direct, and for a political spouse, unusually revealing account of their life. She details at length her supportive husband, of completing her education, including a doctorate, becoming a professor, and teaching at a community college with even after he was vice president, which is something she intends to do when he becomes president. Her emphasis is on finding her own voice with his help, building a family, rituals, love, the tragic loss of the son Bo to brain cancer, and supporting each other's careers. There's a sense of real love and respect among the Bidens. Now, Joe Biden III's illness and death was a terrible blow to the vice president and his family. His namesake's long struggle with brain cancer is recounted in Joe's second book, Promises to Keep, A Year of Hope, Hardship, and Purpose, 2017. As Biden struggled with every parent's worst nightmare. Joe Biden's relationship to the adversity, pain, and suffering that the American people are now feeling amidst the pandemic is very intense, that his relation, the way he relates to it, because he knows what it means to lose loved ones. He knows what economic hardship can be for a family, and it isn't just some abstract problem. Thank you.
Paul.
Sorry I can't be more helpful.
Paul, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the question.
Now the next speaker is Dan McAdams, and we have somebody to introduce Dan. Jim Anderson, take it away. So we want to do no more than a minute or two.
Yes. Well, Dan McAdams is one of the giants of academic psychology, which is quite amazing, really, because academic psychology, to my disappointment, tends to miss out on the person and to emphasize statistical studies of large numbers of subjects. And Dan has found a way to illuminate the life of the individual person. And he's written the foremost textbook on personality psychology, which I'll hold up here, fittingly called The Person. He's published approximately 300 items, including 7 books. One of his main contributions has been his approach to the life story theory, his idea that each person tends to have a story of one's life expresses their understanding of how they live and that shapes their life in many ways. And he's developed that especially in his book, The Redemptive Self, Stories Americans Live By. For those of us interested in psychobiography, to our great pleasure, he's turned his attention to our field, although there was much stealth psychobiography all throughout his work, as he would talk here and there, for example, in his textbook about the lives of different individuals. But he turned directly to psychobiography, first with his outstanding psychobiography of George W. Bush, published by Oxford, and much more recently by his book, The Strange Case of Donald J. Trump, A Psychological Reckoning, also published by Oxford. And so now we turn to Dan McAdams.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you, Ken, for holding up my book. I appreciate that. And Paul, thank you so much for your gracious invitation and for putting up with my sort of impertinent emails when I was a little confused about how this should all work. It's wonderful to see all of you. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to say a few words about the book and how I got into it. I have to tell you, I never set out to write a psychological biography of the current occupant. Okay, I'll say his name, Donald Trump. I was minding my own business, honestly, back in February of 2016, so 4.5 years ago, right around the time of the New Hampshire primaries. And I got an email from an editor at the Atlantic magazine. He had heard about the Bush book I had written and asked me if I might be interested in writing a feature-length psychological analysis or profile of Donald Trump, because the editor thought Trump might just win the Republican nomination, and if he wins the nomination, we'll maybe publish your article. And I said, there's no way he's going to win the nomination, but there's no way I'm going to pass up this opportunity. So I wrote it, did a deep dive into Donald Trump's life for about 2 or 3 months there. I knew nothing about Donald Trump going into this. I didn't know the difference between Ivanka and Ivana. I didn't know how many wives he'd had. I was clueless. I mean, I follow politics closely, but I hadn't followed him, and I had never watched an episode of The Apprentice. So it was really starting from square one, reading The Art of the Deal, and trying to get my hands on as many reputable sources as I could. Ultimately, the piece appeared in June of 2016 as a cover article. The Mind of Donald Trump is the name of the article. And it was, the timing was perfect, really ingenious of the Atlantic to put it out when it did. The book, the article rather, was read by an estimated 3.5 million readers in the first month or so. So it was 15 minutes of fame for me, and it was wonderful. And then I figured it was over and we're done with this because there's no way he's going to win the presidency. But you know, we all remember what happened then. And so I stayed away from Donald Trump for about a year after. I didn't want to have anything to do with him. I figured an article was enough, and I was happy with how that played out. But I felt myself in 2017 and 18 drawn like a moth to the flame to him again. I started taking notes and doing more research. And before I knew it, I was writing the book that became The Strange Case of Donald J. Trump, A Psychological Reckoning. Both the article and the book are structured around a particular framework for understanding personality development that has become part of the currency of contemporary personality developmental and social psychology. I work within an evidence-based psychological science framework. And so I draw on well-validated constructs within the fields of personality developmental and social psychology. And within that field, I tend to see personality development in terms of 3 layers or levels. And so the first layer is what we might call the person from the standpoint of a social actor. Each of us is an actor on the stage of life, as Shakespeare suggested, and we play our roles in our own inimitable ways. guided by the demands of the roles, but also importantly, guided by dispositional personality traits, big ones like extroversion and neuroticism. And well, personality psychologists have spent 7 decades trying to organize this all, and they've got it down to this thing called the Big 5 framework for dispositional personality traits. And so from that standpoint, there are 2 of these traits that stand out very prominently in the life of Donald Trump and always have, 2 out of the 5. And one of them is extroversion, which actually captures more than you think. It's not just being outgoing and gregarious, but also social dominance and energy, as Paul suggested. Trump's extraordinary social force, which has been part of his temperament makeup, I think really since about age 10. I mean, he's just a dynamo, has always been a dynamo. You can't take your eyes off him. It is tremendous forcefulness, almost primal. And historians have rated all or ranked all of the presidents going back to George Washington in terms of these traits. And well, they haven't gotten to Trump yet, but if you look at the list, I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, they're at the top. Donald Trump out extroverts everybody by a mile. He's at least a standard deviation further out in my mind. So you've got this tremendous social vitality and force. And then you have unbelievably rock bottom low agreeableness. Now, agreeableness is a weak and wimpy term for what is arguably the most valued trait in all of human nature. And that is basically how kind and caring and sympathetic and empathic and altruistic and nice and humble you are. And in terms of all the presidents rated by these historians and psychologists, Richard M. Nixon scores the lowest on agreeableness, but he is sweetness and light compared to the current occupant. Shockingly low agreeableness for a public figure in American public political life. I can see no rival even close. And so there's a malevolence to it, as you all know. There's a viciousness to Donald Trump's disagreeableness. So you have these 2 traits, high extroversion, low agreeableness. They make for a very powerful, potent, scary, dangerous temperament profile. All right, fine. Let's go to the next level. What motivates the guy? What are his values and beliefs, his core principles and so forth? So here we're talking about personality from the standpoint of the motivated agent, right? We are all agents in the world striving to accomplish things. What does Donald Trump want in life? And you know, it doesn't take rocket scientists here to see that for a long time now, 5 decades at least, it's mainly about narcissism. It's about promoting the self at the expense of everybody else. And Donald Trump wakes up in the morning and the first thing he thinks about is himself and how he can promote himself and so forth. And well, we could go on and on about narcissism. So I talk a little bit about it in the article. I write more about it in the book. You're all familiar, of course, with that concept, going back even to the myth of Narcissus in ancient Greek mythology. All right, so there's narcissism. And then in terms of the values, well, he doesn't really have a value structure. There really isn't a belief system there, except whatever it is to promote the self. But it sort of tends, nonetheless, towards a kind of set of authoritarian sentiments. And so authoritarianism has become more clearly evidenced in his personality makeup, if you will, as we've observed him over the past 3.5 years in the Oval Office. All right, so far, kind of, you know, maybe not so surprising until you get to the 3rd layer of personality. And Jim mentioned this part. This is what I study mainly, and that's how people create stories for their lives. And so I talk about this 3rd layer of personality development as the personality from the standpoint of the autobiographical author, right? We are actors, we are agents, and we are authors. And as authors, we create stories to make sense of our lives retrospectively and prospectively. And just about everybody does this. And there's a good 15 years to 20 years of research, empirical research. Most of it's quantitative, some of it is qualitative in personality and developmental psychology on narrative identity. And I've spent my life committed to this, my academic life, committed to this concept of narrative identity. And I study how it is that people create these stories and what these stories are about. And so take George W. Bush. Actually, George W. Bush and Barack Obama were very similar to each other with respect to the third layer of personality, in that they both created these powerfully redemptive stories for their lives, and they projected those narratives onto American society. Bush's was about overcoming his alcoholism and his sinful past to become a born-again man of God and committing himself at that point. Obama's was very different, but still redemptive, a story about connecting himself to a long narrative of liberation, going back even to African-American slavery in the 19th century. So they both had this sense that they were figures, characters in the middle of a narrative. And the narrative defines their lives, and it also is projected onto society. So what about Trump? Like, what is his story? Right? And I just didn't get this when I wrote the article in 2016, but it became clear to me in the intervening years, and it becomes the central thesis of my book on Donald Trump, is that he doesn't have a life story, and that I have met my match. I've been arguing for all my career that everybody pretty much is walking around with a narrative identity to provide their lives with a sense of purpose and meaning and continuity over time, but not the current occupant, who really has never seen his life this way. I call him the episodic man, because I do believe that Donald Trump effectively lives outside of time, outside of the temporal sequence of life that the rest of us all embrace. He doesn't have a story in his head about how he came to be. In that way, he's like God, right? God doesn't have a story. God, if we believe, or whether or not, I mean, this idea of God, God just is. God is the ultimate stable genius, right? God just exists. And it's not like God would, now Jesus and, different religions have figures, but God, he, she, it, they exists. It wasn't like born and then it developed and then it's going to die. It's not like that. It just is. And Donald Trump sees himself that way, I believe, as just this thing, this entity, this force, this amazing persona. And there is no story. So if you are the episodic man, you wake up in the morning almost like that movie Memento that y'all remember maybe from a couple decades ago, where the guy has no memory of what happened yesterday and he has to start over every day. Now, it's not that. He has memories, of course. I'm not talking about a cognitive deficit here. I'm talking about a kind of bizarre, strange one-off, I believe, with respect to how a person understands their life in time. I wake up in the morning and I have one goal for the day, and it is to win. I have to win today. And it doesn't matter like who I'm fighting. It could be Nancy Pelosi. It could be my opponent in the race right now, Joe Biden. It could be somebody who tweeted something that he doesn't like from Miami, Florida last week. Whatever it is, he will fight it to the death, right? He will pull out all of his arsenal to win the fight in the moment today. And then he goes to sleep, and then he wakes up the next day, and voila, we start over. To win, okay? And these episodes, they don't add up. They don't make a narrative arc. It's the same thing over and over. So there's no accumulation in the life of Donald Trump. There's no kind of like learning from experience. There's no sense of the past or the future much, except the next election. And notice that he never, ever talks about the future, or here's something all presidents do. that Trump doesn't do. That is, they imagine America in the future, looking back now. How will history see us 40 years from now? Donald Trump can't think that way. He doesn't have that kind of temporal perspective. Instead, he's like which is why he never talks about future generations either, and leaving a legacy for the next generation. All that generativity talk that every other president, Ronald Reagan was a master of it, Clinton, Obama, Bush, all of them, that my lifetime, JFK, he doesn't talk that way. He doesn't think that way. He doesn't experience the world that way. Instead, it's this episodic thing, fighting to win the moment, in the moment. And is this good? Well, it's terrible in many ways because you can't think long term. So like, how do you take on the coronavirus, which is in it for the long term, if you're living in the moment? Well, you lose that battle for sure. But in other ways, it's extraordinarily effective for Donald Trump because he has gone through life in this episodic manner. And so when he's in the moment and you're with him in the moment, and whether you're at his rally or watching him on television or even in the Oval Office, he is all there now. He's not thinking about tomorrow. He doesn't have a hidden agenda. He is primally in your face. And for many of his supporters, I think for millions of Americans, this is extraordinarily appealing and unprecedented. No politician has ever been like this. He has charisma, plenty, because of this sense that he's authentic. And I have to say he is. He is weirdly authentic. And he's a fake too, because he's always playing the same role. It's Donald Trump playing Donald Trump, but that's how he's lived his life. So it's not like when he goes to bed at night, he's a different person or he's got an inner self that's different from what you see. No, it's always fighting in the moment to win the moment. So let me end it by kind of offering a sort of metaphor that helps for me when I think of like, well, what is it like to be like this? Because I couldn't live my life this way. But Trump does it. And I feel it's sort of like being a boxer, right? So you're in the ring and you're boxing for 3 minutes and you can't be thinking long term. You're not worried about round 23 down the road or what happened 10 minutes ago. You've got to be on your guard the whole time, fighting to win the moment, defending yourself against the vicious opponent who is in your face. And that's how he sees the world. I mean, a quote from People magazine in 1980, they asked Mr. Trump, what's your philosophy of life? He goes, here it is. Man is the most vicious of all animals, and life is a series of battles ending in victory or defeat. Every moment is a battle ending in victory or defeat. Trump is the man fighting it 3 minutes in the ring, and then he's done. And then it's like you go to bed, or he sits in the corner for a minute, and then he gets up ready to fight again, and it just never wears him out. It never wears him out. His companies can go bankrupt. He can be impeached. The poll numbers can show him 10 points down nationally, and it doesn't matter. He wakes up every morning fighting the episodic man. So no narrative, no story that integrates it all, and it makes for one very, very strange human being. Thank you.
So we are honored for our next speaker, Dr. Among other things, Denis has been the president of the International Psychohistorical Association. He's also currently the treasurer. He has a doctorate in social work from NYU, where he teaches. He has also taught at Rockland Community College and taught a course in psychohistory there. He has an extensive private practice, and he brings to psychohistory an integration of solid social science research from a variety of perspectives into his publications in a way that's unique. Denis, happy Halloween.
Thank you, Ken. And thank you, Paul, for inviting me to speak. Initially, I have to apologize to Paul and the group that I was not able to get a completed work out before our date today for our meeting, which is usually the the process with the Psychohistory Forum. My subject, I underestimated significantly the amount of time and energy. So what I'll present today is somewhat of a draft, a shortened draft of what I seek to accomplish in the work, and certainly welcome comments regarding maybe ideas, directions that it could certainly go in. The tentative title, Stochastic Terrorism, Trump and the Dynamics of the Leader and the Led. Stochastic terrorism is a relatively new term, although the phenomenon is as old as the most primitive forms of media. One might argue it was utilized by Samuel Adams in his conspiratorial weekly publication, The Independent Advisor, which helped to ignite armed revolution, but also Robert Whitaker's, quote, white genocide rhetoric, inspiring Dylan Roof's June 2015 massacre of African-American parishioners, believing he could ignite a race war. The current age of social media, conspiratorial politics, and lone wolf mass shootings brings stochastic terrorism to relevance. It refers to, quote, the use of mass media to provoke random acts of ideologically motivated violence that are statistically predictable but individually unpredictable, end quote. It's predictable in the same way that throwing a handful of rocks at a target is exponentially more likely to hit the target than a solitary attempt, yet is individually unpredictable as which of the rocks will strike. And stochastic terrorism, where, when, and which one consumer who transforms the message into violent action remains unpredictable. It seems certainly that at least one would do so given the message's content and reach. He, and it is almost exclusively he, transforms the symbolic of fantasy violence to action, doing the bidding of the messenger, yet leaves the messenger with plausible deniability of involvement. Psychohistorical models that explore the interaction of the dynamics of the leader and the led, shared fantasy, and the politics of displacement and delegation processes provided valuable insight into this phenomenon, and as a consequence, I hope, a model to hold political leaders and pundits responsible for inspiring illegal acts of violence for political gain. This becomes ever more of an imperative as we observe the increasing power of white nationalist groups through the use of social media to evangelize and spread violent rhetoric and conspiracy theories, increasing social upheaval and racial and politically motivated violence in the United States. The fact that we have a president tacitly approving right-wing violence by refusing to condemn white nationalists or commit to a peaceful transition should he lose the upcoming election should legitimately concern us all. The history of mass shootings in the United States is a history of stochastic terrorism. Despite staggering statistics on the volume of mass shootings, it is difficult to find instances of non-ideologically motivated events. In fact, following a highly publicized shooting, right-wing media outlets searched for evidence that was not connected to their messaging, focusing instead on the mental health problems of the shooter to limit their reliability. In August 2019, following two back-to-back mass shootings at Walmart in El Paso, Texas, and another in Dayton, Ohio, Trump stated, quote, mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun, end quote, a sick mind pulls the trigger, end quote. Such simplistic blaming of mental serves to deny the complexity of factors involved, including the impact of violent rhetoric of pundits and politicians by projecting blame onto the mentally ill. Neither Trump nor right-wing media outlets discuss the undeniable parallels between the El Paso shooter's manifesto, explaining his anti-immigrant white nationalist motivations, quote, this attack is a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas, end quote, and Trump's xenophobic fear-mongering of an immigrant invasion dominating the media waves at that time. One investigation found 54 cases of hate crimes in which the perpetrator directly links their intent to Trump, with 12 of which doing so during their attacks. According to the FBI, hate crimes are at their highest level in 17 years, and incidents are becoming more dramatic, more violent. It is not a surprise that this rise correlates with an increasing online and social media presence of white nationalist mouthpieces. Jack Posobiec, a neo-Nazi and white supremacist and One American News Network correspondent, just hit 1 million subscribers on his Twitter account, which he uses to promote racist, pro-Trump propaganda and QAnon-type conspiracies. The QAnon phenomenon will be a fascinating topic to dissect, if not so frightening that millions of QAnon followers on Facebook alone believe, without a shred of evidence, that there is a group of, quote, deep state, unquote, saboteurs who worship Satan and traffic children for sex that are attempting to sabotage Trump's presidency. Followers are waiting for the, quote, day of reckoning, end quote, in which there will be a mass arrest of politicians, journalists involved with the conspiracy. Trump has indicated support for the movement as recently as October 15, 2020. Be assured that his support will inspire followers to attempt to produce the day of reckoning, especially if the election loss is viewed as proof of their beliefs. The justification needed to enact their own violent and apocalyptic threats is at the heart of the QAnon conspiracy. Elsewhere, I've argued that the lone wolf label is itself a myth, or better, a fantasy which functionally severs the connection between the perpetrator and the larger movements they believe they represent. Dylan Roof thought himself a soldier and martyr of the coming race war, something he sought to instigate. An alarming tendency of groups formed with apocalyptic fantasies at their core to create the very circumstances they denounce. In this instance, the breakdown of organized society to be rebuilt in line with their dominance. The lone wolf is a delegate for the group, sent with a mission, sacrificed for the movement. In March 2020, Timothy Wilson, who idealized Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh, plotted to blow up a Kansas City hospital, which was already struggling with the COVID pandemic, partly why he chose it. His list of targets also included several local mosques, a synagogue, and a primarily African-American elementary school. Mr. Wilson was killed during a shootout when he sought to purchase materials to realize his plan. He was, of course, active on white national social media groups. He was not alone. The FBI reports there have been roughly 400 similar incidents that have been foiled by the FBI throughout Trump's presidency. This would include the recent attempted coup and kidnapping of Governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. This incident, remarkably, has been glossed over by media outlets, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. But it marks a significant transition from lone wolf terrorism or delegated members of white nationalist groups taking matters into their own hands to organized cells actively plotting domestic terrorism. The Boogaloo movement, which this Michigan group claimed allegiance, started as a bit of humor in online forums, a reference to a notoriously received movie sequel featuring an almost exclusively Black cast. Yet it has come to define an international movement which seeks an armed revolution, overtaking the current powers that be, primarily in the service of reinstituting liberty as an organizing constitutional value and with white nationalist undercurrents. The levels of irony are immeasurable. Another, the base, has further advanced the organization and realization of the revolution. This self-identified neo-Nazi group is perfecting the use of social media to recruit former and current military personnel in both the US and Canada, and is providing military training for members to prepare for the upcoming collapse of society, which they seek to advantage. If time permitted, we could provide countless more examples. The list of Trump's statements encouraging violence itself could fill volumes. We could dissect his calls for violence towards the jury that indicted Roger Stone, or violence towards protesters in general from the Black Lives Matter movement, and the resulting attendance of our militia at protests, including 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, who engaged protesters with an assault rifle, killing 2 of the protesters. But the question becomes one of process, and ultimately, can we hold Donald Trump or other talking heads responsible? Not just morally responsible, but legally responsible for violence done at their encouragement and in their name. Can they be held responsible for a stochastic terror? From a group relations perspective, authoritarian leaders aren't understood as political masterminds that brainwash millions of followers to do their bidding, but, as Young noted regarding Hitler, they are the, quote, loudspeaker, end quote, that give voice to public conflict and yearnings for conflict-inspired action. The leader is a container for group anxieties, conflicts, ambivalences, and meant to transform those conflicts into action. This is not to say that a national group is a monolith regarding unconscious needs of both group and leader, nor that leaders are without their own motivations. But the leader and led exhibit a certain variance to their positions and messaging. Research strongly suggests individual differences exist in the level of need to displace and delegate conflicts, as well as attraction to ideological beliefs that provide justification for the enactment. Yet Trump has never provided a coherent ideology to his followers, as Dan McAdams was highlighting. His was an interactive process of messaging in the form of trial balloons. It was his musings of banning Muslims that catapulted him to the top of the Republican primaries. His build the wall and lock her up chants did much to feed his narcissistic needs, as well as provide a target for displacement, a mutual benefit for leader and led. But his rhetoric would become more and more dangerous. For example, suggesting Second Amendment folks take out Hillary Clinton and a series of other assassination dog whistles throughout his presidency. For us, the obvious question then becomes, what then does he represent? I mentioned 2 bumper stickers that I've recently seen. One says, quote, Trump 2020, fuck your feelings. And the second says, Trump 2020, cause fuck you. Elsewhere, I've talked to Trump and it matches in some ways Dan McAdams' writing, the way in which his tendency, his empty sort of personality provides an opportunity for those kinds of projections that are required for one to follow, and to follow without question. But for the larger group, I've also written about the way in which Trump represents a kind of dismantling, a kind of enactment, much more largely sort of determined in line with what David Beizell writes about in his Diplomatic Blind Spots piece, in which the presence of both significant blind spots, here being Trump followers being blind to his obvious lies and mistruths, and of course the irony that the very things that he often lies about or promises are the very things that he seeks to destruct. That he there then can become, successfully for that group anyway, that subgroup, a way of deconstructing for a group that is extremely sort of pent up with rage at this current time over significant change and especially economic change, the markets changing in such ways that many individuals no longer find a place in it. For time's sake, today I want to skip quickly to usefulness here of psychohistory in general for the stochastic terrorism model. The model itself is relatively new, and it is interesting in the way that it seeks to statistically predict these kinds of terrorism incidents by looking at the content of talking heads, media, politicians, and so on to encourage such violence. But yet it does not include an aspect of it that looks at the dynamics of the leader and the way that psychohistorians typically have, or psychodynamic folks in the group relations tradition look at this interaction. So this is a very valuable sort of aspect, particularly the way in which we can sort of look at the individual differences to pick apart the kinds of underlying sort of meaning systems, some may call fantasies, that underlie or that provide justification for the very enactments, the personality differences of those who have a certain kind of valence or attraction to those belief systems and a desire to enact certain kinds of violence towards certain individuals. So with that said, I'm going to leave it there. But this is generally where I hope the work will be going in the future. The inclusion of more a psychohistorical model for the purpose of providing a much more solid argument for really holding responsible individuals who promote violence or violence that is done in their name while they claim no responsibility. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Denis.
I want to thank you people for continuing this process of psychohistory, for people like Dan to be able to come and deal with us from the Chicago area and give us his very valuable insights, to Mamata and Bridget and those who come at a great distance. Though some people, like our Hungarian colleague, obviously wanted to be here, but the technical stuff couldn't work. But we're going to work on that, and we'll offer meetings both of the traditional group, as well as people like Rachel, who has now moved to California for the last 3 years and was able to become part of our group, and Ken, who's such a long Rasmussen, who's such a long time member of the group and contributor to psychohistory, and was able to be with us today. So there are pros and cons in this arrangement we have. Mostly, I'm extraordinarily appreciative that we can do psychohistory, that we can look at different possibilities, and appreciative to you for being part of this, for Ina for doing the technical parts, for Ken for moderating. And I wish you well in continuing this. Send me your ideas. Send me your thoughts for future meetings. Connect with people, including your friends overseas. I don't know if you, my colleague Bob Becklin, being Swedish born, but so long time at Ramapo, if Bob has connections back in his homeland, that because now we can bridge the distance in a way we couldn't before and get the insights that we weren't able to get. And I know one of my great heroes, Monty Ullman, wonderful dream worker, was had such incredible reception for his dream work in Sweden. So it just so many possibilities come to mind. And most of all, I look forward to future work with you and keep up the good work of understanding our society in more depth, whatever our problems, which are enormous, and your societies. As I look at Bridget and other people who have coming from societies where there are great difficulties. Okay, thank you very much. Let's do psychohistory in the future together.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Paul.